This week on the Walk On podcast, in terms of engaging public servants around AI, what's been the biggest surprise, good or bad, that you're coming away with as you engage people about working with AI?
Probably the biggest surprise is that receptivity. I expected more like, well, we're not ready to embrace that, or we want to think about it more, institutional inertia. And there is plenty of that, but it doesn't seem to be coming from the people as much as coming from the process, right? It's not that the people don't want things to move faster, it's that they're in a process that doesn't move faster. And therefore, we can be allied in saying, how can we, within the construct of what's acceptable and allowable, both work together to make this happen. And I've been very pleasantly surprised at the receptivity and the desire for people to have those conversations.
I must have looked like a neon sign saying, look at me.
Hello, and welcome to the Walk On podcast. We are working our way through season 5. Some great guests this season, continues the conversation that we've been having about finding your passion, finding your purpose, and really having great conversations with people about how they do that, finding their advice that they could offer to others. But also, one of the important things about this podcast is not just a continued conversation about purpose and passion, but also the issues that the people that we have on are managing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's their work, some unique product they're offering. And so this is a 2-for-1. You get to learn about a new topic, but also continue the dialogue about best practice around finding your passion. And with that, thrilled to bring on our guest this week, Jim Anderson. He is CEO of a company called Beacon. They empower state and local governments to harness the power of AI for smarter, faster, and more effective operations. But Jim, really, I've known him for a number of years. He's a great guy, and he's spent a career building innovative technology companies. And you've probably seen him actually if you watch CNN or BBC or MSNBC or CNBC. He's a regular commenter on technology topics from social media to AI and now the future of transportation. So Jim, welcome on.
Glad to be here.
Well, thanks. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, and happy to do so. You nailed it here. I'm basically a civil engineer who happens to be running a software business now, selling specifically into transportation. As you mentioned, I've had sort of a varied career. We can dive into that as interesting. But I when we sold our last company, I was thinking about what do I want to do next with my life? And I thought what the world really needed was a new iPhone photo sharing app. But maybe not really. And no disrespect to anybody who's building one out there. Maybe there's the next great one. I just don't know it yet. But I was really drawn to the idea of solving some of these big, thorny, difficult problems that hadn't been solved by technology, the internet, AI, and transportation is a space that affects all of our lives and needs tremendous technology investments, upgrades, and just historically has been lagging for all kinds of reasons. So it's super exciting to just sort of see what we can bring to bear, the combination of civil engineering and software in the transportation space.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to dig into that. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your career arc? I know you as a successful entrepreneur and tech leader, but talk a little bit about your career arc.
Yeah, it's sort of randomness, maybe one of the themes you'll sense here. So I am a civil engineer by education. Got my bachelor's and master's degrees in civil engineering, and then I started working as a consulting engineer and did that for 8 or 9 years. Liked the work, but this thing called the internet came along. You may have heard of it. It's going to be big one day. So this is back in like 1997, and I made the leap. I had just turned maybe 30 or 31. And I was thinking, hey, now, if not now, when, to capitalize on sort of what may be a transformative opportunity for my career. And as it turns out, it was. And so I ended up jumping into the internet space, went through a couple of fits and starts with startup companies, and landed fairly quickly at a company called MindSpring, which was one of the earliest internet service providers, became part of Earthlink, and spent 10 years effectively, building software development teams, and innovating that way as the internet became, as we moved from dial-up to broadband and sort of cloud computing, everything we've become since. And then I found myself in the era of social media, right? Facebook and Twitter and all that came along, and that changed everything. And so I ended up with another software company serving big media businesses. So the BBCs, the CNNs, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journals that you mentioned before, we found ourselves selling. Those were our customers, right? Helping them get their massive quantities of content out to Facebook, Twitter, and other social networks. And so that was an amazing experience. So, each of these you could think of as sort of rounding to a decade apiece, which I think officially makes me older now. So, a decade of civil engineering, a decade of internet, a decade of social media, and now, bringing, coming full circle back to my civil engineering roots and, now back into transportation.
Yeah, it really is amazing, actually, people of younger generation than we are just know the internet, right? But I remember, and I was on the other side of the coin, but I remember in 1998 when there's this internet boom and deals are being made in the OK Cafe in Buckhead in Atlanta on napkins, and then those folks that just got new investment would come to us and say, "Hey, PR firm, throw us a big party. Can you get like Blues Traveler or Boomer Esiason to come to our event because we've just got all this money?" I really remember when the internet was at its infancy in terms of the business sector, and Mindspring and was really at the start of that.
Yeah, and you've already made this connection that AI feels a lot like that again today. Whether we'll get the same boom exactly the same way, what kind of busts there will be along the way. Everybody remembers the dot-com bubble and when that popped. So there's lots of speculation, and it's always easier to see in hindsight what was going to happen. I mean, if we could all predict the future accurately, we'd all be very, very wealthy. So you don't know quite how this is going to turn out or when, but it certainly feels like AI today has got a lot of echoes of what you were talking about exactly back in 1998, which is the year I jumped in and joined Mindspring was in 1998. So, and we were dealing with dial-up, the gurgly bonk modems for those of your listeners who are younger, right? Like you used to have to literally dial into it was just kind of crazy. It's like a museum piece now.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this with tongue mostly in cheek. The difference between the start of the internet revolution and the start of AI is one of them can't take over and blow up our planet. But that's a whole other conversation, right? So I've seen a couple moves in that, but no, we'll get into that. So I appreciate that. So, if we can, what are some of the key lessons you've taken from entrepreneurship and building out and helping these tech companies grow, and now where you are in the AI space?
Yeah, it's gonna sound like a cliche, but things become cliches, for a reason. It's all
Sure.
about the people, right? I mean, people are, companies are aggregations of lots of things, capital and equipment and those kinds of things. But most importantly, by far, is people. Right. And that's actually a pretty big theme. Is AI going to displace people? And how is it going to displace people? And I think, like all technological innovations, yes, it's going to displace people, and maybe significantly displace people in ways, going way back to the Industrial Revolution, and the original Luddites, quote, or was a group in England that went and destroyed the weaving machines, if I remember correctly. And so, this is not a new issue, and it's significant and painful, every time it happens. And we shouldn't be flippant or glib about the real impact it has on people, but neither is progress going to stop. And so I think that's the real question is like, okay, how do people play out here? I do not believe at all that people are going to somehow be displaced and not important. It's just the role of people inside companies is going to change in ways, some of which maybe we can predict, most of which I would submit are not. And so again, back to your question about what's most important, the people, and understanding, who's going to help you get where you need to go and how you can build those kinds of relationships.
Yeah, I think, as you know, I went back to school last year and got trained in executive leadership coaching and performance coaching. And I remember on the first day, they said, "Why are you here?" And I said, Elon Musk is going to call me, and hopefully not now, but Elon Musk is going to call me, and he's going to ask me to help figure out his team's underperforming. So how do we get them to optimize so we can get that rocket, off to Mars? And they were like, and I don't want any of that touchy feely stuff, right? And they were like, let's just stop you here. You're in the wrong place, sir. Companies aren't widgets. They aren't supplies. They're people. And it's true, right? I mean, people are human and they have needs and wants, and how do you optimize their performance? How do you make them feel valued? So yeah, I would agree with that people are the cornerstone of all organizations.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, I mean, because it is, okay, wow, that's an amazing insight. People are important. I would say that the piece I would add to that is don't just think transactionally. I mean, we all have things we need to get done. We need deals we need to get closed. We need transactional things. And so I think there's a real tendency to view your interactions with people on that transactional basis. It's the most efficient way to do it. I need this, and then when I don't need anything, then our conversation is done. And of course, think about it when you're on the receiving end of that, when somebody is just very clearly interested in a transaction. It's not that invalidates what they want to do. Of course, we all have our own needs and interests there. But if that's the only thing you bring to the table is just that transactional mindset, that's going to end up with a very different set of relationships than if you are genuinely interested in the people. You can be human, you can connect with them. Maybe now's not the right time to do a deal. Hey, the budgets aren't there, the timing is wrong, that we can still talk, and I can not make you feel like, and you won't make me feel like, oh yeah, well, you can't give me what I need right now, so why bother?
Yeah, and within that's so spot on. And within teams as well. I mean, the data is staggering right now of the number of workers who don't feel heard, they don't feel valued, they don't feel an investment from the top. And so it does. It feels like I'm here and you're getting as much out of me, squeezing more time out of my day, making me work at home with my phone and my computer. And so, yeah, I think that's a really important insight.
Yeah.
So let's pivot and dive into the AI. We've skirted around a little bit, but it's top of mind for everybody these days. So why don't we start with Beacon? Talk to us a little bit about that and the work you're doing with governments.
Yeah. So specifically departments of transportation. So we all, know sort of roads, bridges. And my joke is like, hey, have you ever been stuck in traffic? Were you happy about it? And it's not really a joke because people have all been stuck in traffic. We have all been stuck in traffic and precisely nobody is happy about it. Right. So why can't this be fixed? And there's a complicated series of reasons why it is the way it is. But getting to your question about AI, what can AI do about it? People's mind tends to go to the robot drone fleets, autonomously dispatch, dynamic, signal timing algorithms with machine learning and all kinds. And there's a tremendous amount of really cool research going on there. But by and large, that is research, right? That's not the real world. The real world has much less sizzle. I'll tell you, when we talk to our clients and prospective clients in the DOT and the transportation space, most of them are not overwhelmed by terabytes of machine learning data, et cetera. They're overwhelmed by documents and paperwork. What we think of as paperwork, of course, has now been digitized, but it's like, okay, I got 8,000 PDF documents, right? What do I do with all of that? And so when people talk about being overwhelmed by data, one of the big insights we have found is, and I say this oftentimes, it's words, not numbers, right? Don't think about terabytes of data that show up in a spreadsheet. Think about just a whole bunch of PDF documents. Who's got time to read them? Some of these documents are 600 or 700 pages long. So no human is going to read all that stuff.
Yeah. And, look, I think I'm a firm believer that the world, nothing is ever as good or as bad as we think it is, right? It ends up somewhere in the middle. And, I think as we're talking about governments and AI, I don't think most people know what it is, right? Their experience is ChatGPT or, autocorrect, right? They don't have, and so it's this, I don't know what it is. It's a cool toy. I can use Canva to create a logo now versus what I sort of joked about. It's the end of days, right? And there's not a lot of room in between that people are truly invested. So, but AI yet is moving fast, right? So, how do you, and government as a result doesn't always seem to move as fast as So how do you navigate that tension between government being slow to adapt and adopt or apprehensive versus the market's moving and we have a tool that can help you? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, slowly is one answer, more slowly than I might like, right? I mean, of course, we're all excited and ready to bring the next generation of technology to bear on important problems. But I think this goes back to, you've got to understand where people are coming from, right? And I think the stereotype is a lot of people, government employees or whatever, either they don't want to change or they're resistant or they just want to live in the past or those. I have not found that to be true at all. What I have found is that they are operating under a set of constraints that most people don't understand from the outside. Do you understand state procurement law? Do you understand, if I'm a government employee, what I have to do? Not because I want to, but because state law mandates that I do that. And if you don't like that, and you don't, well, then why don't you go talk to the politicians who wrote the laws and get them to, oh, yeah, well, that's hard. So I think that's probably the first thing, is you just got to understand where people are coming from and why things are the way they are. Otherwise, you're just going to sit there and continue to sort of bang your head against a brick wall and saying, well, it shouldn't be that way. It's like, well, maybe not, but it is that way. And just because you don't want it to be that way does not mean you're going to change it. So you've really got to focus on the reasons why things are, and then, okay, what am I going to do about it? Well, that means I have to go about contracting and, productizing, packaging my offerings in a way that's consistent with the way government knows how to buy things. And it's got to be competitive, and it's got to be fair, and it's got to serve the citizens of the state or the city, or, all those things that quite well, that are important and necessary. So, it's really, I think, incumbent on you, or me in this case, is the person who wants to be playing in this marketplace, to understand the place where I'm playing and understand what I have to do to be successful.
Yeah. And I think in part of that, going back to the first part of your answer, is, people don't really understand government is a blunt hammer, not a scalpel. Government was set up to move slowly. So it didn't move at the whim of whoever came in and control this, there, that way. We're, not to get political, I think we're with Doge and other things, that's getting tested very quickly. and we're seeing sort of norms be broken. But I think that's what people from the outside don't understand. And so often, as you said, when you're going in to sell to the government, there are rules and procedures in place that may be arcane and they slow down the process. And I would like to see us speed up that process in a lot of areas, certainly when it comes to infrastructure, right? I remember I used to represent the Georgia Department of Transportation as a PR client, and this was 2000. And the head of DOT said, whatever we are working on today from an infrastructure perspective, we're talking about like 285 for people who don't live in Atlanta, sort of this belt line that goes around the city and it moves people. It's a highway. And he was saying, whatever we do today won't help you. It won't help your grandkids. It'll likely help your grandkids' kids, right? And so your great grandkids, 3 generations, and they haven't done a ton since then. So I'd love to see a streamline, and it sounds like you can help with that. So maybe can you share a story where, your AI tool made a real difference and that how that might be an access point to talk to government?
Yeah, no, that's a great example. I mean, so exactly what you just said, from concept to constructed, right? What's that gap? And the good news is, at least since 2000, I would say, I'm not sure about your grandkids' kids. It's tightened up some from then, but we were just talking yesterday about a sort of a roundabout, a traffic circle, which has become a very popular traffic control device and is its own special interesting topic for some of us. But it can go. It'll take 5 to 7 years to go from concept. Wow, we could use a roundabout at this intersection to actually having a constructed roundabout. Why does it take 7 years? It's not because it takes that long to move the dirt or pour the pavement or roll the asphalt. It's starting with the concept, right? Is like, well, all we have is a concept right now. We haven't even defined what kind of roundabout, how big of a roundabout. Isn't, in fact, a roundabout the right choice? We haven't hired consultants to evaluate it. We haven't surveyed the property. We haven't, so you actually stitch together the critical path of everything that needs to happen from concept to constructed. And it's very easy to latch onto, oh, if I had 2 more bulldozers moving earth, well, it's not the bulldozers that are the limiting factor. It's all the stuff back at the beginning of the process, including back to what we were just talking about, procurement, right? When you want to retain an engineer to write a consulting report on the environmental impacts or the wetlands that may be adjacent or the foundation investigation or the surveying needs or all those kinds of things, you need talented people with a specific set of experience and skills to do that. But to hire them, well, guess what? You have to go through state procurement processes, and that takes a while. And by the way, you don't hire engineers typically on low bid, because you don't necessarily want your bridge designed, for instance, by the low bidder, right? I mean, you want people with a certain level of qualifications. So it tends to be qualifications based. Well, that means if you're not hiring on low bid, then how do you price it? I mean, you can't just tell them, to tell you how much it's going to cost. You have to have some negotiation and ability to protect the taxpayers and the ratepayers, money there. So what you have to do is you have to do your own estimate. Well, geez, I just hired somebody to do the work, but I've got to do the own. So all of that is a long way of saying that there are multiple steps along the way that when you think about something like, and I'll just say like a Chat GPT, obviously what we're building is not Chat GPT, but imagine using those types of capabilities like, hey, I wonder if I could get this engineering estimate done quicker. I wonder if I can put a request for proposal out on the street quicker. I wonder if I can process these documents quicker. I wonder if I can review the responses that come back in quicker. All of those kinds of things. So just think of these incremental opportunities along that 5 to 7 year journey to shave off weeks, or in some cases, even months off of the process, so that maybe a 5 to 7 year process ultimately can be made into a 3 to 5 year process.
Yeah. And, thinking of the politics of it, right? I mean, I've spent a little time, I'm an elected official and spent a little time in politics. Ezra Klein in his book Abundance has come up a bunch this season. And he talks about one of the things that really hurt the Biden campaign and administration was they made this seismic investment in infrastructure, right? One of the biggest investments since certainly the Great Depression, but nobody saw actual results of it, right? And so in 4 years, you can make this massive investment, but what actually came out of it? And so it's not top of mind for voters. And so, yeah, if you can get it to a 3-year, 4-year term, it's great for the projects that we're bringing forward. It's great for the problems we're trying to solve. But it's actually, the folks you're talking to, politicians and others, it's a real opportunity to say, hey, we're trying to improve this process to better your lives.
Yeah, without a doubt. And also the other benefit, which if you think about it, makes sense arithmetically. Inflation only goes one way, right? It's up and sometimes it's significantly up. If you can take a 7-year project and make it a 5-year project, and we're talking, millions and millions of dollars to build these things, if not, hundreds of millions of dollars to build some of these things. If you can get it done, if you can get it constructed 2 years sooner, well, that's 2 years less inflation that's going to contribute it. So you get more for your money when you do it sooner. You eliminate, some of the time, the cost and calendar inefficiencies that come along with it. I mean, there's almost no argument to not try to do it faster as long as you're being responsible, right? To your point, government is built a certain way. The goal is not to move at the speed that private industry wishes everything would move, because private industry, myself included, is very self-interested in our own private businesses. But clearly, to your point about the Ezra Klein abundance agenda, the way that things have been happening, everybody, political party aside, would agree has been taking too long.
Yeah. And so what has been the response that you're getting when you walk in and say, because it is a bit of a flavor of the day, but also there's this unknown. So what's sort of is it blank stares you're getting when you come in? Is it, oh, we can't do that? Like receptiveness? What are you hearing from people?
Generally, quite receptive. I've been very pleased by the desire of people to engage and talk about it, right? So that's the first clue. Are you even interested in what I'm talking about? And almost everybody is interested, and they want to learn more about AI more broadly. They've got their specific problems. Of course, who doesn't want to solve their problems quicker or more easily? So I think they're intrigued by the potential for this to solve some of the very real problems. What resonates the most is when we get very specific, like I just did. It's like, hey, I want to talk about your engineering estimation within this 5 to 7 year process. I don't want to like wave my hands and talk about AI and robot drones and the digital future and generic transformational, things. Those are all fine again, but that's not what's going to resonate with them. It's the very specific. I've got a problem. You can deploy a solution to solve that specific problem in this specific way. Then you're left with the other challenge. Okay, great. I want that. Now, how do I procure it? Right. In compliance with, state laws and, the way we have to do things as a government, that ends up taking its own special, set of conversations and amount of time. And it's a challenge for the people who work in government too. It's not just those from the outside. It's not like there's a magic procurement answer for the people running, our roads and our DOTs. They have to follow the same guidelines and try to figure things out there on their own as well.
So going a little bit deeper on that in terms of, engaging public servants around AI, what's been the biggest surprise, good or bad, that you're coming away with as you engage people about working with AI?
I think probably the biggest surprise is that receptivity. I don't know what I expected, but I expected more like, well, we're not ready to embrace that, or we want to think about it more, or give me 2 years. I guess I expected a little bit more institutional inertia, and there is plenty of that, but it doesn't seem to be coming from the people as much as coming from the process, right? So that's maybe the big insight and the big reveal is it's not that the people don't want things to move faster, it's that they're in a process that doesn't move faster. And so it's up to us, and therefore we can be allied in saying, how can we, within the construct of what's acceptable and allowable, both work together to make this happen. And I've been very pleasantly surprised at the receptivity and the desire for people to have those conversations.
It's good to hear and reassuring, and I think forces people to confront what is AI, how do we use it, and since we have you, and this is what you do really well, as I open up this question, I'll frame it this way, and I'll out myself. I'm not a Luddite, as we talked about them earlier, but, I firmly believe in the role of technology in empowering us. I firmly believe that, we're already using AI and it is making our lives easier. And I use it professionally. In fact, I wrote my questions for today and then I was like, let me see ChatGPT. What should I be asking? And they added a really good additional question. So I thought it was in some language. So it's a tool, right? And we can use it. I will also admit, though, and this is maybe outing my perspective, and I read Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt's book, Genesis, which tries to get into some of the policy, the future of AI, where it came from, where it's going, and sort of the policy. And because I know there are bad actors in the world, because I know government moves slowly, there is this uncertainty of how do we put AI to work for us instead of the reverse? And as I turn it over to you, I will say, and it's not creepy at all, that I was preparing for this interview, and today on top of my news feed was how Chat GPT or one of them tried to escape last year, and I'm just now hearing about it, right? And just so everybody knows, apparently they tried to shut down the database and it tried to export itself and then lied about it. And I don't know how I'm just hearing about this a year later. But anyway, so with that long-winded caveat and saying it's a good tool, technology can be really empowering. It is going to be disruptive, as you said, but this is a little different. And I know every generation says that, but I firmly believe it's different. This does have the capability to be used in really powerful ways by nefarious actors and or self-awareness. So with that broad overview and that rambling introduction, Jim, what is the future of AI?
Wow. So there's a couple things to pop to mind. One, what we call people who predict the future, right? We call them futurists, right? That's a job profession. You know what we call people who can predict when the future is going to happen? We call them billionaires, right? So maybe I can predict or maybe not. Whether I'm going to be accurate on timing is a whole different question.
Yeah.
But the other thing that comes to mind in these presentations I give on AI and transportation, I've got a recurring theme. I talk about AI is bad, AI is good, AI is misunderstood. That's sort of the mantra throughout the presentation.
Okay.
And all three of those things are true. It is bad, it is good, and it is misunderstood, right? So stop thinking about it as AI is a force for evil, AI is a force for good, AI is confusing. I mean, you can think about all three of those things and you can hold multiple thoughts in mind at the same time. In fact, you should hold those thoughts in mind. So then that suggests, okay, under what circumstances is it bad? Under what circumstances is it good? And what do I need to do to learn about it, right? And that's easy to say, hard to do, because I do this stuff all day, every day. I can't keep up. So if you have a job that just sort of doesn't involve AI, I don't know how you can begin to keep up. Very much like the early days of the internet, right? It's like, oh my goodness, this stuff's changing. But it's almost like I imagine, let's say we're in the year 1999 and somebody's like, oh, I can't keep up with all this internet technology. I'm so far behind. I might as well just give up. Yeah, probably not the best choice, especially if you have 5, 10, 20 years of working career left. So I think the best time to get in the game is today. And so you need to be using it and not just reading about it or worrying about it. And then when you do that, you can start to see exactly what you said. Oh, there's a positive use case. I was going to be interviewing this person. I wanted to ask another smart question. And then you can also see the potential for misuse, right? Oh, I'll go off and I do a research project and I get a bunch of answers back. I don't read it. I turn it in, whatever. And it embarrasses me because I was sloppy and I didn't notice that it had some obvious tells. Well, don't do that. I mean, in some ways, that's common sense. Don't take output out of Chat GPT or any other large language model and without reading or considering it, turn it in, whether it be for a school assignment or a work. I mean, I feel like I'm saying a lot of common sense there, but I think a lot of that just sort of gets, people think, oh, it's AI. Somehow the way I conduct myself is or should be different. And I'd say, no, be responsible, do the work, be thoughtful, be considerate, and then find ways that, wow, this makes my job easier, faster. My research projects are easier. I can come up with wording, reword emails or reword documents, sort of quicker, faster, better than I could before. Those are all amazing things.
Yeah, look, I mean, so to your point earlier, right? There is no new technology. Yes, this is new technology and it's a new day, but we've faced this before. And as you were talking about that and the thing about homework comes up, well, we had Cliff's Notes, right? 100 years ago, these little books that cut War and Peace into 50 pages and they told you what each chapter was about. And you might copy that and put it into a report, right? So it's no different in that regard. I think the challenge is the disruptive nature that this, has. It will be seismic for our world, and not just if Terminator becomes real, right? Like that's the other case. But you talked about job disruption. What do you think that looks like as we get to it becoming a much more powerful tool that's replacing some of the things we do on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think it will be significant, but again, I'm going to go back to the unpredictable, the ways that we can't necessarily imagine. And I'll say, software developers is a good example. That was, for the past 5 years, that's probably been the most golden ticket job you could imagine. If you've got a kid or grandkid, like, hey, you should go into software development. Everybody's going to be needing more of those. And sure enough, AI comes along, supposedly makes software developers vastly more productive. I think the reality is far more nuanced than that. And I know young people who are having a hard time getting software development jobs. And part of that is also, I think there was over hiring in the COVID area, specifically as it relates to software development, because it's a job that could work remotely and you didn't have to be there in person. So there were a variety of circumstances that came together. And if you're a junior software developer looking for a job right now, it's a very painful time, right? And so you're finding yourself through no fault of your own, in a situation where it is very very challenging. And I think it's very easy to say, I'm going to blame AI and be angry about it. And I'm not saying anger is not justified. I'm not sure it's constructive or helpful. So I think that what I would always try to do is say, what are we going to do about it? And those areas that are disrupted, whether it be software development or other, sort of white collar jobs, I think is the idea that, wow, what happened to manufacturing and people with manufacturing jobs might now be happening to, white collar office jobs that have largely been immune to that. So I think those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to grapple with. And just as technology, presents those problems, technology potentially offers us solutions. Like, okay, what is it? Reskilling? Is it training? Is it a mindset? Is it just an adaptation of large numbers of jobs that have to be recreated in different ways? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's probably, the reality is probably a combination of all of those things, and with a degree of humanity and sensitivity towards the trauma and the challenge of people whose jobs are disrupted, what they have to then do. I think we just got to get to it, and we got to do the work. That's a theme that keeps coming up. And when I say we have to do the work, that means those of us who run companies, government agencies. I'll tell you, the government agencies I'm dealing with, they can't hire enough people quickly enough, right? So partly because of their salary structure, partly because of their processes, et cetera. So there are pockets of the economy and pockets of, sort of jobs that exist, whether they're the exact right job in the right location with the right skill set and the right salary range for people. That's the open question that very much has to be confronted.
Yeah, I heard somebody the other day, and I'm going to bastardize it a little bit, but they basically said AI won't replace people in the workforce. They're going to replace people in the workforce who don't know how to use AI, right? And I think about my business. I'm a public relations consultant, communications consultant, and I never would dabble in creating logos or building websites. That's just not it, right? But now I can go on Canva and I can produce reports. I can design websites. I can do all these things, but I'm not taking food out of the mouth of somebody who's building websites, because I wasn't going to have them build my website before, right? So if you have a company, you're building $10, $15, $20,000 websites, I'm not stealing that from you because I'm not paying for a $10,000 website. I'm not your market. So I see it as it's a great enhancement in that regard, but I'm not stealing necessarily business. So my long-winded way of saying, I buy into what this person was saying, that it's a tool, and those who will thrive will be people who learn to leverage it, and those who don't, just like, as you said, robots coming into, car factories or other things. It's yes, there will be displacement, but how do we retool people to leverage the technology to make us more productive and to make them more productive?
Yeah. And I will say this, is you may not be taking that website business, but somebody is, at some point, if you're making $10,000 or $20,000 websites and the technology is advanced to where, the market value for, at least for the commodity version of that's $500, well, that's a disruption that's going to happen sort of regardless of what you do. And so there's a tendency to conflate and say, oh, it's AI's fault, when in reality it's just like, hey, you had a really nice business for some period of time, just like, newspapers had a really nice business for some period of time. They had monopolies on printing presses. They had the trucks that distributed the newspaper. And then along comes the internet, like, whoops, that advantage no longer applies. And they went through, decades of very significant disruption because of that. So I think there's a tendency to blame certain technologies or certain things, as that was the proximate cause. And maybe that's accurate, maybe it's not. But I'm going to go back to, what are we going to do about it? Because you're not going to put the genie back in the bottle.
And I think that's so important in what you just said, right? It's the news industry saw the internet coming. I mean, it happened quickly, but they saw the internet coming and they didn't adapt. And I sit, in the Finger Lakes in upstate New York as recording this, where there was this company, Rochester, New York was the original Silicon Valley, right, of the production days. You had Kodak, Bausch and Lomb, Xerox, and Kodak literally created digital film and was like, hey, our digital, production. And they were like, you can do that. You can research that. But once it cuts into film, we're cutting it loose. Film is our business. And they let it go and they got bypassed, right? So it was criminal. But that it really is that, right? How do you adapt and see the technology and bring it into your business?
I'm glad you brought up the Kodak point, because I want to raise this just sort of finally dawned on me. It took longer maybe than it should have. So you're right that was a strategic blunder, by Kodak, and they were one of the world's dominant companies, and then became, if not irrelevant, certainly the world passed them by in some significant ways. But imagine you were the CEO of Kodak at that period of time. It's like, I see the future of digital photography. I see the potential. Maybe I'm an amazing visionary, but I'm the CEO of a publicly traded company. And if I crater our revenues, I'm going to get fired in 2 quarters,
Mhm.
no matter what my vision is, right? So again, I'm going to go back to the process, not people thing. It's not that the executive leadership of Kodak was dumb. I didn't know them. I don't know for a fact, but I have to
Sure.
believe they're really smart, talented people doing their job and probably getting good advice like, hey, this is going to be disruptive, but just structurally, what are you supposed to do? I can't, unless you're the owner of the company, and a CEO for the most part, especially if a big company is not the owner, you can't just go make those things unilaterally, especially if you're publicly traded. So, he would have gotten himself fired, and how would that have served anybody's interest? So it's a really interesting nuance to layer onto that, oh, wow, yeah, there's people problems, and maybe there are some people who don't get it, don't want to embrace the future. Then there's structural problems that prevent them
Mhm.
from embracing the future. And maybe, some people would suggest, well, that's just the nature of capitalism. If you don't do it, somebody else is going to come do it. And that's how big companies grow, right? Small companies come along, the big companies can't adapt structurally. The little companies do what they need to, and then they disrupt.
Well, I mean, you just brought up a whole conversation for another day, but when the tail is wagging the dog, right, with Wall Street, we can't make small bets or large bets sometimes because you are a publicly traded company, and the smallest change you can make will impact stock prices. I mean, I used to be a Black Friday spokesperson for Walmart, and I'll never forget the first year I went on TV, and I was getting ready, and my boss, I'd been at the company like 6 months, and she's like, "Hey, by the way, just so you know, Wall Street and the CEO of the company are watching, so don't screw up," right? And it's literally like, but it is that sense of, I could have uttered some nonsense on air, and our stock price that day, well, it wouldn't have that day because they weren't open on Black Friday, but the markets, it could have cratered, right? And so I get your point. It is hard to see the future coming, to make strategic investments, which might be significant, to pivot. Those are all things that Wall Street is averse to rapid change unless they're capitalizing on it. So I get it. It's a great point. And so I think that is a interesting place we find ourselves, where companies are now seeing the future and trying to understand it, but also figuring out, how do we make it work for us and the constraints that we have, whether you're government or a business.
Yeah, I completely agree. We are in an interesting time, and what's the ancient? I believe that people have decided is a curse. May you live in interesting times. So I don't know whether there's a blessing or a curse. It is interesting. I mean, having had the career arc I've had, I continue to be surprised and amazed at, it's not like the rate of change is decreasing. If anything, it's increasing, and it's just that,
Mhm.
what seemed impossible a few years ago is very possible now, and what will be possible that we can't even imagine, 5 years from now is, I can't wait to see what it's going to be, and hopefully help create what it's going to be.
Yeah, becoming a father as you're a parent, really brought that into specific relief for me, right? I was thinking about, I'll never forget, we went one day, and the Ford Probe came out. And I remember my dad being so enamored with it. This is in the early 90s, and going, that was the car of the future. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, in all the sci-fi movies, that looks exactly like the car of the future that I was promised. And here it is. And now I think forward to my life and the invention of the internet and all these other things. And then I think about my 4-year-old, and what will, in his lifetime, what are those technological innovations going to be? And if he's lucky, AI won't blow up the planet, and he'll have many iterations of technological advancement to digest as we have. So I think you brought up your career arc. It's a perfect time. I appreciate your time today. It's a perfect way to pivot back to, you're clearly passionate about this work. You're clearly passionate about being on the cutting edge of technology. So what advice do you give for others trying to pursue their passion?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. Number one, I would say, is be flexible and be open to new opportunities, right? Just because you can chart out and be very diligent about what you pursue, and some people choose to do that, and that's fine. For me, I've been much more opportunistic. I'm interested in a lot of
Mm.
things, and when something presents itself, oh, wow, that's interesting. Maybe I should pursue that. And so I would encourage a degree of flexibility. I'm not suggesting anybody not pursue their goals or their dreams. And if you're on a path and you want to become a neurosurgeon, well, then you should go to med school and follow that path, by all means. But if you're more interested in sort of the journey, and you're interested in a lot of things, I think that opens up the aperture, quite considerably, and you never know what quite might hit next. So flexibility and openness is one thing I would advise. And the second thing is, you do have to do the work. I said this before. At some point, I've run into this in my early part of my consulting career. I was doing a lot of environmental engineering work. I'm a civil engineer, as I said. So a lot of the work was environmental at the time. And I think people think, oh, I'm out saving bunny rabbits and, dancing in fields of daisies, when in reality, no, I was going to oil refineries and laundry detergent manufacturing facilities and helping them with their air permits and, other kinds of things, which was a lot of paperwork and fairly tedious, walking and crawling through things to try to inventory equipment. It wasn't very glamorous. It wasn't what you might dream of, but in its own way, it was interesting. It was hard, right? It was hard work. And so I think at some point you just can't, there's no substitute for doing the work. I don't care where you are or what you are. If you think your journey and your path to purpose is going to be easy, well, good luck. I hope you're right. I just somehow doubt that you will be, because I think the work and putting in the effort, very much like the going to the gym or physical fitness, right? If you just sit on the couch all day, every day, that's probably not the path to good health and physical fitness. And it's hard to get out. It's hard to get up and get off the couch. It's hard to go to the gym. It's hard to do the work in the gym, all those kinds of things. And I think there's a work metaphor for that as well.
I love it. And people who listen to the podcast know that when work comes up, I have lots of quips about it because I think it's irreplaceable. It is the thing that is the differentiator. You could be smart, you could be talented, you can start on third base versus first base because of the opportunities that presented themselves, but you have to do the work. I firmly believe that. But I loved your opening the aperture a little wider. I mean, I'm someone who, my dad would probably, would have said that I couldn't keep a job. But for me, it was the opportunities that presented themselves. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let me go do that. There's serendipity there. And I think there is something to be said for following opportunity and making it more interesting and really leveraging who you are and what you bring to the table. Opportunities are opening up because you've done the work and you bring something unique to the table. And so I think that was really powerfully said. And I endorse it 100%.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the uniqueness, I think, is worth emphasizing. There was a famous anecdote, again, I'll get it wrong, about Steve Jobs, but he took a calligraphy class as he was meandering through college, generally unsuccessfully, as the books wrote it. He was not a particularly good student because he wasn't interested, but he stumbled on a calligraphy class and he was fascinated by that. And then, years or decades later, when he's at Apple Computer and they're creating the Mac, he's like, this calligraphy thing matters. And so I'm going to bring this sort of artistic bent to something at the time, which was not, computers were not artistic at all. It's like, wow, what an amazing combination. You could put those two things together. And so that uniqueness is what opens up the opportunity to connect worlds that most people can't connect, right? And so I worked with advertising agencies, and I'm a civil engineer, and I've built software. That's a very unusual, sort of set of combinations, and it creates opportunities that may be unique to me, or at least unique to that combination, that aren't typical. And so your listeners, everybody's got their own unique path. And so whatever you can do to combine those things, you're never quite sure how it might benefit. But I love that Steve Jobs story for that reason.
Yeah, I love it. And maybe I'll leave on this thought. As you were talking about crawling through various things and inventorying and doing things as an engineer, my mind went to, but then you're at the cutting edge building software, right? And it seems like a massive leap, but it's that opportunity that was created and a skill set you brought to it. And I just think it is a really great example of leveraging, as you said, your unique skill set with opportunity and seeing where that takes you. And I find your career very fascinating, and I appreciate you sharing it with us.
No, thanks. Happy to talk about it, and really appreciate the opportunity to sort of pontificate on some of this stuff and have a smart conversation with somebody who's thinking about it. And like you mentioned, that Terminator thing, there are some real potential negative things that can come from this. And I think none of us should be naive to that. So the best way to confront that, I think, is to talk intelligently and respectfully about it. And I really appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Awesome. And because I gave, technology a bit of a hard time today, I'll say all the smart questions that you just said you got came from AI, and the dumb ones were from me. So with that, Jim, I appreciate it. Where can people learn about Beacon?
Beacon.dev, DEV, as in software development, is our website. And, it's very specific. If you're in transportation, we'd love to talk with you. If you're not in transportation, good luck. Go poke around our site, see what you can learn. But beacon.dev.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. This is great. And everybody, this is the Walk On Podcast, people leading with passion and purpose, providing a roadmap for your personal journey. Hear their stories, find your passion, walk on. Thanks again, Jim.
Thanks.
Next up on the Walk On Podcast. As you were going through that sort of working of convenience or working of the opportunities that presented themselves, what was the pivot point where you're like, you know what, I do want to take this passion I have for self-improvement, and I do want to explore bringing that to other people. What was that moment for you?
Well, I used a life coach, a professional coach, which was really helpful in helping me sort of tune into what I was passionate about. I'm lucky enough to have choices. And I remember being in an office of a nutritionist, a trainer. I was working out at the gym and asking all of these questions. And she said to me, you should just go study this. Like, you're geeking out more than anybody I've ever seen. And not everyone needs to know the details of all of these instructions that I'm giving you. It sounds like this is something that you're passionate about. And so that's how I got into it.
Know what I'm doing here? Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know what I'm trying to prove by getting with you. It was only a matter of time.